So a few days ago, I dropped my Dexter Resurrection review, and I thought it would be appropriate to give my ideas on what an alternate version of that show would have looked like if it weren't, in my view, as rushed as it was. Just to kind of give you some semblance of what I would do. Now, if you watch the review, you'll see that I mentioned that I really liked the first four episodes. I would leave those pretty much intact. I think they're very good at setting up a lot of things that could have lasted for multiple seasons. So I'm doing this video kind of with the assumption that you're getting a 3 season show, which is something that I heard they were hoping for 3 to 5 seasons, multiple seasons. You get the idea. So from episode 4 onward, right, we get a little bit of divergence when it comes to having Mia actually be someone that only takes out predators. Dexter doesn't reveal his identity to her, which is something that he was considering doing in the fifth episode. Instead, he would basically say to her, "Hey, can you do me a favor? There was this case in this hotel, and I wanted to maybe see if you could help me by sort of basically taking the fall without directly revealing who she is. Just calling the police department and say you did it without them being able to trace your call back, or leave some other type of thing that would implicate her without, again, actually having her get caught. And this would be a little bit of red herring for Wallace. But just to kind of go a little bit forward here, I would really like it if, instead of having the whole Harrison and Gigi thing, save that for season 2, and for the rest of season 1, you have Wallace pursuing Harrison as her main suspect in the Ryan Foster killing, and her digging into his past in Iron Lake is pretty much her subplot for the rest of the season, where she goes to Iron Lake, she talks to Teddy, who was already in the show, just to get an idea of who Harrison is. Maybe we have an episode where she speaks to Angela. And, this would kind of, again, tie Resurrection more so with New Blood than was already established. Because I said you really could just watch the last episode of New Blood and not be that confused as to what's going on in Resurrection, which is unfortunate because there are some things from New Blood that I like that I think they should carry over. And having, some of the cast from that show up even for a single appearance makes it feel more organic than just having one person show up and everybody else doesn't exist anymore. Now, one thing I'll also keep is Dexter killing the first Gemini right in his apartment. And one thing you would get from that scene, because this isn't actually brought up in the show, is Dexter going, "Oh crap, I need to make sure I do a better job of covering my tracks." You got to remember, Dexter's secret identity, or rather I should say, his place of residence, gets exposed 3 times in the actual season of Resurrection. First, Gemini finds out where he lives, then Batista finds out where he lives, and of course later on, Charlie and Prater, and that they if they can uncover who he actually is, they can find out where he lives as well. So his identity constantly gets revealed. But what I'd like to do here is kind of play with it a little bit more, where we get that 6th episode killing of the first Gemini, the plot twist of the other Gemini coming on that, to hang out or be revealed later on, just as he is in the actual show. But with this Gemini, the second one, we're going to do something a little bit longer lasting, where every time they have these meetings, maybe we have a meeting every episode, every 2 episodes, he's always asking, Red, "Hey, how come you haven't told us anything about yourself? How come all these, Lowell vanished suddenly after you showed up? And, we don't really hear as much from Mia," who in this version is kind of, she's not as good at lying about what she is as Dexter is, because she just doesn't have the experience with the whole Two-Face thing and, the multiple identities. Because as we established in the, actual show, she's separated from her sister, and her mother. So she doesn't have to, she's not experienced pretending to be one person and then being something else to someone that she consistently knows, like Dexter is. So we would just have Gemini, the second one, kind of like, he has this suspicion that Red is not who he says he is. Prater is, none the wiser. Charlie's a little bit, kind of, she's sort of there's nothing there for her to really feel like this is the guy that is causing stuff to go awry. But what I would do is, towards the end of season one, you're gonna have Dexter go to Wisconsin with Al, on some kind of like friendly trip. Maybe he's like just trying to make sure he can get another one of these guys. And he's spurred on by Al saying something like, "Oh, I found this woman. I want to cut the ponytail off." Something similar to what happened with Lowell. And while Dexter is out of state, going over here with Al, Rapunzel as they call him, this is where we would get Batista tracking down where he lives, meeting and speaking to, Blessing. And then when Dexter comes back from that trip, that's when we get pretty much the same scenes we had in the seventh episode, with Batista revealing that he, now knows where Dexter lives and the whole like threat and whatnot. But the way I would end this first season is that Wallace would basically say, you know what, Harrison might have killed this guy, but based off of the testimony of these different people, he doesn't sound like a bad kid. I don't really have that much evidence. I'm going to let it go. So she's got like a little bit of a suspicion that it was him still, but it's not enough for her to believe this is some evil person that needs to be put in prison, because the only person he's killed was someone who not necessarily deserved it, but plays into that whole vigilante justice thing, where it's very clear if Ryan wasn't trying to rape someone, he wouldn't have been killed by Harrison. So that's the resolution to that story. You have, again, Batista finding out where Dexter lives, and really the ending of season one should be that same scene of them in the car together, where Dexter makes the threat and Batista doesn't want to back off. Now, in that same, hypothetical season one finale, I would have Harrison, introduce the idea of wanting to be a police officer, right? Wanting to be a cop. And this would form the basis of his story in season two, which is trying to go to school to become an officer. But we're going to actually like do an extended version of it. So he would meet Gigi very early on, first, second episode, and they would have a relationship that actually develops, right? Where it's not just, oh, they go on 2 dates and then they're banging, something that's more organic and we can actually see play out over a 10 episode season. Gemini is continuing to be kind of like doubtful of Red, because we would have had Dexter at this point kill both Lowell and Al by the end of the first season. And Gemini, starts kind of looking around. He's noticing that, this Red person, he's more of us just keep dropping. What's going on? And it's all been while this guy's around. And what would eventually happen is we would get the twist that, just like his twin, he was able to track where Dexter lives. He was able to figure out his actual address, because he one day just decided, you know what, this guy's weird, something's off, I'm just going to follow him, and that would be how he gets to him. But unlike his twin, he doesn't reveal that he knows where Dexter lives. He doesn't reveal that he's been in his apartment. He would be a lot more secretive in that sense. We would see things from his perspective, him just outside staring in, and just kind of like the gears turning. Now what I want to really do, because we're going to have the two subplots of Harrison having his little thing with Gigi and going to school and trying to become an officer, while also having Batista continuing to antagonize Dexter, where he's showing up to his house and getting friendly with Blessing and learning more and more things about him and telling different things to them about him, just really exposing stuff. And one plot from season one, or I guess the only season of Resurrection so far that I liked, was the whole Dexter blabbing to Joy and revealing things about Blessing to her, unintentionally. And I thought it was so crazy that they would have something like that, like a plot like that, right? Just be, wrapped up, resolved in, 2-3 episodes, really not factor into the finale at all. But instead we do here is kind of like have Dexter have these exchanges with Joy where she's like, oh, my dad's so annoying, just different comments that are kind of like showing her getting irritated by him for the various comments and things that he says. And you would get about halfway in the season, probably like by the 5th, 6th episode, where Gemini just goes full scorched earth. He reveals to Prater who Dexter actually is, and Prater is fascinated by having the Bay Harbor Butcher among his different killers. And this is where you get a scene that's similar to what we had in the Resurrection season finale, where Predator says, "Hey, I'll be your benefactor. Just take out, some killer for me." And then of course, we would be introduced to. I wouldn't have had. We'd be introduced to some other killer that Dexter would just go and like track down. This would be, just kind of a thing where, he'd mostly be on the run or on the hunt for different killers going across, to this state, this location, or even, in some cases having them come over there just to kind of, make things interesting. And we'd have Mia also tagging along for some of these adventures, because I'd really want to have her sort of be slowly integrated into Dexter's life, where initially, right, no one of that dinner group knows who he actually is, and then Gemini figures it out independently, then he tells Prater, and even among that like small group, they still are not communicating, hey, this is not the Dark Passenger, it's the Bay Harbor Butcher, because it's still like that whole secretive thing, and kind of like keeping things to themselves. But in the season 2 finale, after Gemini is able to unearth evidence that his brother was killed by Dexter, he decides to retaliate. Dexter would show up, and this is not like a end of season type thing in terms of the final scene of an episode. Oh my god, big shock! You probably would have this happen in the second to last episode of the season, so like the ninth episode instead of the 10th. But Dexter would go back to his apartment. He would come over there, think job well done. I've been killing all these different killers because Prater told me to, and has been helping me in spite of knowing who I really am. Feeling really good about himself. He shows up at his apartment and he sees police tape. He goes inside, he sees this teary-eyed Blessing, and then and he's like, what in the world? And when he goes into that house, he finds the corpses of Blessing's wife and Joy's fiance. And he instantly knows it was Gemini who did it. Now Dexter decides, after consoling Blessing, to go on the warpath looking for Gemini, get revenge on him for killing these innocent people who he has become closer with. And at the same time this is going on, Batista, because again, we've now had a whole season of him just ingratiating himself to Blessing. He's like, hey, I lost, my wife as well, and I think Dexter had something to do with it. And this is where he first blabs the idea of his belief that he's a serial killer, right? And Blessing would say, a serial killer, there's no, and then would start thinking, wait, this is someone who sits up in that basement, that attic by himself, and is out late at night. And suddenly, this is where he starts to kind of cast doubts on whether he actually knows Dexter that well at all. So when Dexter is able to take out Gemini, that actually upsets Prater, because Prater is very close to him. He gives him the bonuses, right? This is someone who he thinks more highly of than most of the different killers that are part of his collection. And the enraged Prater basically says to Dexter, look, man, I hate to do this to you, but you got to be punished. You broke our agreement. I let you feed on the ones I select, and he was not one of them. Dexter would argue, oh, well, he killed these people I was close to, and Prater would say, hey, too bad. I'm going to reveal who you are. And this is where, because again, in this version, Prater has not killed anybody. He's just a crazy guy obsessed with serial killers. Dexter would kill him to keep his identity secret. And this is complete, obvious self-preservation. It's not played as, oh, well, this other person took out the person that knew what he really was to keep him safe. No, it's Dexter killing someone to keep his identity secret. Someone who, is kind of morally dubious, right? You can still be a bad person, never kill anybody. I mean, he showed that when he took out the freak that was taking pictures of Astor, for example, in the 3rd season. So he clearly is willing to do that if he thinks it's, morally right to just not have this person around anymore. But this is going to kickstart the plot for season 3, where Dexter's going to, be trying to, continue on his whole thing of being a driver and, trying to just move on from what happened, months and months ago with the murders of Blessing's wife and then Joy's fiance, and he notices how distant Blessing has become to him, right? And he goes, Batista, hey, what did you do to him? And he's like, hey, I just told him the truth. And Dexter can't do anything to him because he can't stop him from telling people what his theory is. But again, in these first couple episodes, he's trying to just maintain some semblance of calm, right? Just pick up business as usual, getting closer to Mia, etc. But by the third or fourth episode, as the police are kind of just trying to figure out where has this billionaire vanished to, where has he gone off to, and they're asking different people who had some acquaintance with him. Charlie, in her role as Prater's lackey, number 2, whatever you want to call her, she goes around and says, hey, I think this Dexter Morgan person had something to do with it. And she's showing them different pictures of him going to the mansion, of course out of context, right? Not going to tell them he was there as part of the serial killer gatherings. But what she'll do is clue the police gently in his direction, and then just outright go meet with Batista and then hand him over evidence of stuff that will correlate the idea of Dexter being the Bay Harbor Butcher. And so this again is like about the halfway point, maybe by the 4th, 5th episode of the 3rd season. And when this happens, Dexter goes on the run. He tells Harrison not to wait up, and he for those last, I'd say, several episodes of the show is just trying to stay away from the police, dodging, ducking, dodging. But he's going to be caught by Batista and sentenced to death. And that's how I would end the show. I would have him in this setting of New York, attempting to make a new life for himself, right, with new friends, but those same vices from the original series have traveled with him from Miami to NYC. And I really think, like I said, that idea of that serial killer group, excellent. And you could have done so much more with it. And I really think if they went with this route where you have the group kind of like initiating Dexter into it, and then he's starting to become more and more attached to one member in this like friendly way, but then also trying to take out the other members. And the one that he took out happens to be the brother of someone who's on the FBI's most wanted list. And that person isn't exactly that easy to take out. And it ends up, biting him and the people he cared about in the backside, majorly. I really think that would be an excellent tipping point to just setting him on that complete downward spiral. So I don't have any intentions of watching Resurrection Season 2 because I already tore up why I don't want to watch any more of that show. But I hope you enjoy just kind of some ideas of like, hey, this is how I would have proceeded after the 4th episode. And this is what it looked like to me they were going to do, or at least, something similar before we ended up getting what we got. Again, a lot of those concepts I like. You just need to let them breathe.